My father hid my ID and birth certificate 2 days before university registration, saying, "If you can't even keep track of your things, how will you survive college?" When I told him he'd always treated me as less because I'm a girl, he scoffed, "You'll fail, and you'll come crawling back." I walked out. That was a year ago. Yesterday, he sat in court as the judge read his guilty verdict. My father tried to ruin my dream of going to college because college is just for boys. Now, he's livid because I proved that I am better than him. I have always dreamed of going to college. I studied hard, got good grades, and even applied for scholarships. But my father has made it very clear he doesn't think girls need higher education. This mindset didn't appear out of nowhere. Growing up, there were countless situations where my dad treated me differently than my brothers simply because I'm a girl. When I was 10, I told him I wanted to be a doctor. He laughed and said, "Why waste time? You'll just get married and stay home. Better learn how to cook instead." My brother, who was 12 at the time, said he wanted to be an engineer. Dad bought him books and kits to practice building things. At 13, I came first in my class for the science fair. My dad said, "That's nice, but science isn't for girls. You should help your mother with chores." That same year, my younger brother got a participation ribbon for a school football game, and Dad took him out for ice cream to celebrate. When I was 15, I saved up for months to buy a used laptop for schoolwork. One day, I came home and found it missing. My dad said, "Your brother needed it more. You can share or just use your phone." I got scolded for being selfish when I asked for it back. By the time I was in my last year of high school, I knew I had to fight for my dream. I studied late at night because during the day, my dad would always give me extra chores while my brothers relaxed. He'd say things like, "Boys need their rest. You're just helping the family." When I mentioned I was looking at universities, he laughed again. "College is for boys. Girls just get distracted and waste money. You'll be better off learning to be a good wife." My mom stayed quiet. I applied for a competitive scholarship in secret, telling only my teacher. When I got the acceptance letter, I was overjoyed. The scholarship covered tuition, books, and housing. I thought my dad might finally be proud, since it wouldn't cost him anything. When I told him, he looked annoyed, not happy. "What's the point? You think you're smarter than me? A girl alone in the city? You'll just cause trouble. Stay home." I reminded him it wouldn't cost him a cent, and I had already worked so hard. He shook his head. "You're stubborn like your mother. You'll regret it." Over the next few weeks, he tried to wear me down. He forgot to give me important mail, including documents from the scholarship office. He'd make me run errands all day so I couldn't prepare. When I protested, he'd say, "You're being dramatic. You think you're too good for this family?" One day, I overheard him on the phone with my aunt saying, "Don't worry, I'll talk some sense into her. No daughter of mine is going to live far away like some loose woman." The final straw. 2 days before the university's registration deadline, my dad hid my ID and birth certificate. When I confronted him, he smirked. "If you can't even keep track of your things, how will you survive college? Maybe this is a sign you should stay home." I tore the house apart looking for them. My mom whispered that they were in his locked desk drawer, but she was too scared to give me the key. That night, I picked the lock while he was asleep and took them back. When he found out the next morning, he exploded. "You're ungrateful. Everything I've done for you, and you sneak around like a thief." I told him everything I'd held back for years. How he treated me like less because I was a girl. How he celebrated my brothers for the smallest things but ignored my hard work. He scoffed. "You think a piece of paper will make you better than me? You'll fail, and then you'll come crawling back." I walked out that same day, documents in my bag, and went to stay with my best friend's family until I left for school. Last week, I moved into my dorm. The university even offered me a paid tutoring position because of my high entrance exam score. My first paycheck will go toward a new laptop, mine, that no one can take away. My brother texted to say Dad's been in a bad mood ever since I left. My aunt told me he's been telling people I ran away to shame the family. I don't care. I'm finally free, and every time I sit in a lecture hall, I know I proved him wrong. He said I'd regret it. The only regret I have is that I wasted so many years believing his words meant more than my own dreams. But yesterday, when I went to the student services office to submit some paperwork, the clerk glanced at her computer screen and frowned. Are you sure you're still enrolled?" she asked. My heart dropped. "What do you mean?" She turned the monitor slightly toward me. On the screen was a request, filed under my student account, to withdraw me from the university effective immediately. The clerk clicked a few more times and turned the screen fully toward me, pointing at the details section. The withdrawal request had been submitted at 3:47 a.m. from an IP address in Edison, New Jersey, and the contact email had been changed to my father's personal Gmail account. My hands started shaking as I stared at the timestamp and location, realizing he'd somehow gotten into my student portal while I was sleeping hundreds of miles away. The clerk, whose name tag said Dr. Morrison, immediately picked up her phone and called someone from IT security while typing rapidly on her keyboard. She explained that this looked like fraud, and they were placing an immediate hold on my account to prevent any further attempts. Within minutes, 2 campus security officers arrived and started taking down all the information, while Dr. Morrison printed out screenshots of everything. They had me fill out a breach report and told me to change all my passwords immediately, which meant I practically ran back to my dorm room. My roommate found me frantically typing on my laptop, changing every single password I could think of, and enabling 2-factor authentication on everything. She brought me a cup of tea and sat quietly while I worked, probably sensing that something serious had happened. The betrayal felt worse than anything my father had done before because this time he'd tried to destroy my future from hundreds of miles away. My phone suddenly lit up with message after message from Dev, each one more frantic than the last. He was typing so fast there were typos everywhere, but the main message was clear. Dad knew the withdrawal had been blocked and was driving to Aunt Kamala's house right now. I tried calling my aunt immediately, but the line just rang and rang, going to voicemail every time I tried. Then Arjun texted from home with another piece of the puzzle that made my stomach drop. He'd found my old laptop in the garage, the one Dad had taken from me years ago, and discovered Dad had been trying to crack into it for weeks. Mom had known about it but was too scared to send me any direct warning, though now I understood all her weird comments about being careful with technology. That evening, my aunt finally called back, her voice shaking so badly I could barely barely understand her at first. My father had shown up at her house demanding she convince me to come home, screaming that she'd corrupted his daughter. When she refused and told him I was an adult making my own choices, he turned to her husband and claimed she'd been secretly funding my expenses behind his back. This caused a massive fight between my aunt and uncle, with my cousins crying in the background as my father stood there looking satisfied. I tried to focus on my chemistry homework in the library later, but every single notification on my phone made me jump and check the screen immediately. Other students studied peacefully around me, completely unaware that my entire world was falling apart through a series of texts and emails. Dr. Morrison sent me an email around midnight with documentation showing 2 more withdrawal attempts that morning from different IP addresses. The university IT department was now treating this as a cybercrime case and had already traced 1 attempt to a public library computer near my hometown. The next day, Nisha showed up at my dorm with containers of homemade food her mom had sent, along with some news that actually made me smile for the first time in days. My father had gone to their house trying to convince her parents that I was bringing shame to both our families, but Nisha's mom had literally pushed him out the door. She told him that any parent who doesn't support their daughter's education is the one bringing shame, not the daughter trying to better herself. But the worst was yet to come when I opened my email the next morning and saw a message from my scholarship committee. Someone had contacted them claiming I'd provided fraudulent information on my application, saying I'd lied about my grades and extracurricular activities. The email was signed, "A concerned community member," but I recognized my father's writing style immediately, especially the way he capitalized random words for emphasis. The scholarship committee sent their response within 2 days, stating they found 0 evidence supporting my father's claims. They attached a warning letter about legal consequences for false accusations against scholarship recipients. I printed everything out and walked straight to campus legal services where a caseworker named Janet took my folder. She scanned each document while typing notes into her computer system. She gave me a case number and said they'd start a formal harassment file immediately. 2 weeks into the semester, my physics professor stopped me after class to praise my tutoring work with struggling students. He mentioned 3 freshmen had improved their test scores after working with me during study sessions. Each small win felt like pushing back against my father's attempts to ruin my education. My phone rang during lunch one day, and I saw it was my mom calling from an unknown number. There's something really telling about how this father keeps changing his tactics. First, it's hiding documents, then hacking student accounts, now false reports to the scholarship committee. Each time she finds a way around his control, he just finds a new method to try. She was whispering, and I could hear grocery store sounds in the background. She said my father was planning something with my social security card, and she'd heard him on the phone about loans. The call cut off before she could say more, but I heard the fear in her voice. 3 days later, I went to the campus financial aid office and asked about identity theft protection. The counselor helped me freeze my credit with all 3 bureaus online right there in her office. She showed me how to set up fraud alerts and gave me pamphlets about protecting my personal information. She added notes to my file documenting everything we'd done that day for their records. During my next tutoring session, I helped a freshman named Jake work through calculus problems while my phone sat face down on the table. The screen kept lighting up with notifications, but I couldn't bring myself to check them. Jake asked if I was okay, and I just nodded, focusing on the equations in front of us. The normal college moment felt weird against everything else happening in my life. That evening, I finally checked my phone and saw Dev had posted on social media about daughters who forget family values for Western corruption. He wrote that education doesn't replace character, and got dozens of likes from aunts, uncles, and family friends. People commented about respecting parents and staying true to culture without knowing the real story. Arjun sent me a private message saying Dad was making him transfer to my university next semester to watch me. He apologized and said he didn't want to be a spy, but Dad threatened to cut him off too. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. At the end of week 3, campus security called me to their office about a letter from a lawyer. The letter claimed I was mentally unstable and my family requested the university perform a wellness check on me. The security officer shook his head and said they recognized this as harassment based on my existing file. He added the letter to my case and said they were building quite a collection of evidence. During chemistry lab the next day, my lab partner Sarah noticed I kept messing up measurements. She suggested we study together in the library after class since we had an exam coming up. I accepted, grateful to spend time with someone who didn't know about my family drama. We found a quiet study room and spread our notes across the table. Sarah explained reaction mechanisms while I took notes, feeling almost normal for the first time in weeks. The next morning, Dr. Morrison called me to her office for an urgent meeting. She had a thick folder on her desk with my name on it containing 7 documented attempts by my father to interfere with my education. She said the university was considering filing for a restraining order against him, but needed my consent to move forward. I looked at the stack of papers showing everything from the fake withdrawal request to the wellness check letter. My hands shook as I signed the consent form for the restraining order, while Dr. Morrison made copies of everything for my records. That night, about a month into the semester, I set up my laptop in my dorm room to video call Nisha's family during their dinner. Her mom had made my favorite curry, and they'd saved a spot at the table with an empty plate like I was really there. When Nisha's mom said education wasn't rebellion, but evolution, and that I was always welcome, I broke down crying for the first time in weeks. The next morning, my phone buzzed with texts from classmates sending me links to videos they'd recorded at the main gate. My father had shown up with Dev and 2 uncles, yelling at security guards who wouldn't let them past without my permission. The videos showed him calling me ungrateful and saying I was bringing shame to our family name, while students filmed everything on their phones. Within hours, the videos had spread across campus social media, and the student union president, a senior named Rohan, posted his own story about family pressure. He organized a meeting that afternoon where dozens of students shared similar experiences and offered resources for dealing with cultural conflicts. Walking across campus at dusk that same day, I watched other students casually casually calling their parents while I deleted my father's 13th voicemail without listening. I knew it would just be the same demands to come home wrapped in different threats about my future. 3 days later, campus police called me to their office and showed me security footage of a man taking pictures of me walking to class. The private investigator they'd caught admitted my father hired him to document my behavior and report back on who I spent time with. The officer said they'd add this to the restraining order file and increase patrols near my dorm. That weekend, I discovered I couldn't make calls anymore because my father had canceled my phone plan when I tried calling Nisha. The health center called me in to fill out emergency coverage forms since he'd also removed me from the family insurance. I spent hours in their office while they scrambled to get me covered through the university's emergency fund for students in crisis. Using the campus Wi-Fi, I checked my email and found a money transfer notification from an account I didn't recognize. Kamala Auntie had secretly wired me $500 through her friend's account, risking her own marriage to help me. Her note said my grandmother would be proud since she couldn't read, but made sure Kamala could get an education. That evening, an unknown number called the dorm phone, and when I answered, Arjun's voice came through a burner phone. He told me Dad was monitoring his regular phone and planning to claim me as a dependent on his taxes to mess with my financial aid. Arjun had taken photos of all the documents Dad was preparing and would email them from a library computer. The next morning, I walked to the counseling center for my first therapy appointment, my stomach in knots about talking to a stranger. The therapist, a woman in her 50s, listened without judgment as I explained everything that had happened since leaving home. She helped me see that what my father was doing wasn't just strict parenting or cultural tradition, but actual abuse. She gave me worksheets about recognizing manipulation patterns and scheduled weekly sessions to help me process everything. 2 days later, the financial aid office called me in urgently because they'd received a letter claiming I had hidden assets. The signature was clearly forged, but it triggered a mandatory review that would freeze my work-study payments for at least 2 weeks. The financial aid officer apologized and said they had to follow protocol, even though the letter seemed suspicious. I walked back to my dorm feeling sick to my stomach, knowing my dad was trying to mess with my money now too. The next morning, Dr. Morrison called me to her office and I could see papers spread all over her desk. She pushed her glasses up and told me she'd been tracking all the weird stuff happening to my account. She'd contacted the university's legal clinic and found a lawyer who wanted to help me for free. Her name was Sarah Winters, and she'd dealt with parents trying to control their kids' education before. I met Sarah that afternoon in a small office near the law building. She was maybe 40 with short brown hair and looked really serious when she read through all my documents. She said my dad was using every trick she'd seen and some new ones too. She started making a file of everything, including the fake withdrawal request and the forged letter about hidden assets. While we were talking, her phone buzzed and she frowned at the screen. She asked if my dad might contact my old high school, and I said I didn't know why he would. 2 days later, I found out exactly why when my old guidance counselor, Ms. Smith, called me. She sounded really upset and said my dad had called the school claiming I'd faked my transcripts to get into college. He'd demanded they send him copies of everything and started yelling when they said they couldn't without my permission. Ms. Smith said she'd reported him for harassment after he called 5 times in one day. The school's lawyer sent him a letter telling him to stop contacting them or they'd get a restraining order. I thanked her and hung up, feeling more tired than I'd ever been in my life. That night, I was studying in the library when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. My hands started shaking when I read it because it was from my mom using a phone I didn't know she had. The message said she was leaving my dad and staying with her sister. She said my courage to choose education had shown her she could be strong too. She said she was sorry for staying silent all those years. I stared at the screen for so long the words got blurry from my tears. I texted back asking if she was safe and she said yes, but to keep this phone number secret. The next day, the Campus Indian Association president found me after class. Word had gotten around about my situation and they wanted to help. They were organizing a fundraiser because they'd heard about the insurance problems and frozen work-study payments. I tried to say I didn't need charity, but she grabbed my hand and said this was what community meant. 3 days later, they'd raised $2,000 through dinner sales and donations. People I'd never met were handing me $20 bills and saying they believed in me. One older woman pulled me aside and whispered that her parents had tried the same thing 30 years ago. By the time midterms came around in week 8, I was running on 3 hours of sleep a night. I studied every free second because I couldn't let my grades slip and give my dad any ammunition. When I got my scores back, I'd gotten A's on everything, including the physics exam everyone said was impossible. Mom finally found her voice after watching her daughter fight this battle alone, proving sometimes the student really does become the teacher in ways nobody expects. My physics professor asked me to stay after class and offered me a paid research position in his lab. It would pay $15 an hour and look great on grad school applications. I accepted immediately, even though I had no idea when I'd find time to sleep. 3 days later, Nisha called me crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said police had shown up at her parents' house looking for my mom. My dad had filed a missing person report claiming she'd been kidnapped by feminist influences. The officers had rolled their eyes when they read the report, but they still had to investigate. My mom had to go to the police station and prove she'd left on her own. The whole neighborhood was talking about it, and my dad was telling everyone my mom had been brainwashed. Dev texted me that night from his own hidden phone saying dad was going crazy at home. He was breaking things and screaming about losing control.